Welcome to Spotlight On, where we examine the technology shaping our world through conversations with the people building it.
I'm your host, Ping. I'm here with the CEO of Sysdig, Suresh. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ping. Thanks for having me.
Well, Suresh, just for the audience, maybe give us a little bit of a background soundbite on Sysdig and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Sysdig is a cybersecurity company, and our mission is to secure and accelerate cloud innovation for our customers. So if I start with the problem description, we all know increasingly that companies are turning to the cloud for more and more of their software-powered innovation, and the cloud accelerates that innovation. At the same time, for security teams, the cloud presents a massive surface area in terms of risk of security breaches. There are two things that we do for our customers. The first is, how do you prioritize which security gaps are most likely to lead to a breach in the first place? Right. So which vulnerabilities, which misconfigurations, which permissions and entitlements that users and identities have could lead to a breach in the first place. Secondly, if and when attackers do make their way into your cloud estate, how do you detect and respond within minutes, knowing that you only have 10 minutes before an exploit is launched once they make their way into the cloud? So that's really the problem that Sysdig set out to solve.
For the listeners, Suresh and I have known each other for at least a decade.
Indeed,
And I've had the chance to work with Suresh on multiple occasions in different companies. How did you become a CEO, Suresh? Like, what was it? Was it like, you know, when you were a kid in India, you were like, hey man, one day I want to be a CEO, or was this kind of a journey that kind of happened on its own?
No, actually. So first of all, I'll say all three of the companies that I've been CEO of were Excel portfolio companies. Just coincidence, or people I worked with. But I was
good taste.
Good taste, exactly right. I was an engineer. I have to say, I left engineering and did my business school, and I was a consultant at McKinsey for 6 years. My last project at McKinsey was trying to cut costs in a paper mill in Indiana, a town that was already decimated by years of cost cutting. And that's when I realized this is not what I want to do. So I came to the Valley on a whim, literally, to meet a friend at NetApp. And he just said, why don't you just meet a few of the folks at NetApp? And I could not believe the difference between the paper industry in Indiana and Silicon Valley in 98, 99. So I completely fell in love with the Valley. And that's my journey to tech. So at NetApp, I spent a decade starting in alliances, then ran product management, then ran engineering. But at the very last 2 years at NetApp is what turned me on to startups and CEOs. So we acquired a company called Decru at NetApp. This was a security encryption company. And the premise of the company turned out to, so first of all, the company grew from 1 to 20 million in 4 quarters because Bank of America had to testify in Congress that they had lost a tape with tens of millions of US consumers' credit card details. And so that just created a frenzy around encryption and security. And that's when we acquired Decru. So it grew extremely quickly. It turned out the technology was better embedded inside file systems and so on. So the company itself had a very quick rise and a quick fall. But those 2 years, I left my role running all of NetApp's product portfolio to run Decru. And at the time, we had structured Decru as this independent subsidiary because half of its business was protecting EMC customers, a company that competed with NetApp, right? And so we structured this as an independent subsidiary with its own sales, its own marketing, its own everything. And I just had the time of my life. I realized then that while NetApp was a fun company, I loved growing up there, my greatest joy was in running the small Decru company. And so that's what I wanted to do next.
You know, one of the things that you've had to do was the founder CEO transition. Right? Like, you know, most of the companies you've been involved in, there was a founder CEO.
All three of the companies.
All three are founder CEO. Indeed. They're super talented, very bright entrepreneurs.
Indeed.
The founders were always still at the company, highly engaged, they become friends. And what makes that work? Because, you know, as an investor, that's one of the riskiest things we can do.
So I think there are 2 or 3 things. One, I think you have to invest an enormous amount of time. And as a CEO, the more that you can take the attitude of, I am a custodian of what you've built, I'm not taking over from you, it's a partnership. You have to believe in your head that it's a partnership, that the founder created this and you're grooming it, right? And so it's a joint. So I always treat, even now, anytime there's a big decision, even if it has nothing to do with Lawrence, the founder of Sysdig, his domain, I always call him to say, here's what I'm thinking. Even if it's something as completely removed from his daily job as we want to get into Asia and Australia. We found this person and we're going to make a big bet on a new VP where we didn't even have that plan. Just making up an example.
Right.
You still want the founder to feel like he's partnering with you in company decisions, not just technology or whatever the founder's domain happens to be. I think that's the first thing is you have to go in saying this is a partner, not someone that's owning a domain of the company. The second thing I think is if the exec team acts like a unit, then the founder sees that there's a group of people that are shepherding the company rather than just this relationship between the CEO and founder. I find that the most valuable time is in aligning the rest of the exec team.
But how do you build the chemistry with the founder? Because I've watched you now over the years, build that trust, right? And you gave some good examples how you get everyone aligned. But is there things that you do that you would say, hey, look, for a founder going through a transition or a CEO coming into a new situation, here's things that help build that? Because at the end of the day, the trust is everything.
No, for sure. So most of the founders that I've dealt with come from a product background, right? That's their, and so I think it helps that I have a product background. And honestly, my goal is to know the technology and product as well as the person that's running product management or R&D every time, not at the level of sort of code, if you will, but at the level of every function in the product and why is it shaping. And so I think the first thing is investing that time. And then the second thing is I always create a kitchen cabinet around the different functions. So while we have an exec team, right at Sysdig, for example, my VP of engineering, my VP of product, and our founder, Loris, and I probably spend at least 12 to 15 hours a quarter where we are just in open loop brainstorming mode, right? And so when you invest that kind of time on a topic that the founder deeply cares about, then automatically there is no more, I can finish his sentences, he can finish my sentences when you're doing it quarter after quarter, month after month. So I think time is, you just have to invest time and you have to sort of almost be conversant in what they care about. I think that helps as well. And lastly, Ping, I really think it makes a huge difference when the founder believes that you are acting in the same interests as they are. So that's what I mean by you have to believe that the founder is a partner, right? Not that he's reporting to you. And so if you can completely eliminate this notion of who reports to whom and act almost as if they are your partner in building the company and every decision is a shared decision, then I think the guards go down completely.
Sysdig is one of those classic pivot stories, right? Like when we invested in Sysdig in the seed round, it was observability, almost more forensics, frankly, than observability.
Exactly
an open source project called Sysdig, and that's not what it does today, right? Take us through that transition. Pivots, everyone loves talking about in startup land. They actually rarely work. Haven't done this for a while. Like, how did you go from one space to another?
No, indeed.
All the things that needed to happen to actually execute it successfully.
So I joined in 2018, and there were two big ahas in the first 9 months for me. Two things struck me, and I'll tell you a little story at an offsite that happened at the end of the year. First thing was Prometheus was an open source project for observability that had just come along. And I remember sitting in a conference room in a debate between my founder, Loris, our head of product at the time, and our head of engineering at the time. And the debate was, how compatible are we with Prometheus? And the debate was one person saying 70%, another saying 50%. I'm sitting there saying, guys, you just finished telling me that Prometheus is the most impactful open source technology for observability. We are competing in that space. Our customers want to use Prometheus, and you're debating whether we're 50 or 70% compatible, and we know it takes 100% compatibility to win. So problem was a problem. The second observation was that we had shaped our product on the strength of some really large customers like Goldman Sachs, Comcast, Experian, and Booking were among the 4 largest customers.
For the observability product.
For our observability product. Every single one of them was doing something different with our product. And so the core technology, what I realized was that, and then we had the security product that was just nascent. The core technology was so powerful that we let individual customers shape the products that we built on top. and we didn't necessarily have a consistent pattern.
Right.
So that was that was the reason why we had to step back and say, where do we need to go from a product strategy standpoint? At the end of the year, we had this offsite, and when I asked the exec team, guys, we can't invest in both building a full-on observability platform and a full-on security platform. How would we make a choice? I think it was a bit daunting because we had 2 and 2. 2 people saying monitor, 2 people saying secure. So as an exec team, we were split in our minds about which way to go, right? And so that was the backdrop to having to pick, which is we had spread ourselves on many areas. And we knew that we had, not just me, this was all of us collectively concluded that we couldn't fund as many areas. The core technology was perfectly suited to threat detection and response. It was a bit of a force fit in the monitoring world. It was much more of a troubleshooting tool. And most of the world first wanted monitoring, not troubleshooting. And so given all of that, security was the logical choice.
And what was the interaction with you and Loris, right? Because Loris, created Sysdig, the open source project.
The good news with Loris is that he didn't have this sort of absolutely dogmatic view that it has to be this way and no other way, right? He is, to this date, humble in his willingness to learn all the time. And so that helped. His fundamental conclusion was, look, we built this because that's what sort of customers told us to build it. I reckon he was the first to recognize the problem we were facing. There were some signals from the customer base telling us we needed to make some hard choices here. The temptation was to let revenue dominate the decision. Because remember, 95% of our revenue came from the product that we were saying is not our future. That was, I have to tell you, that was a nerve-wracking period because we were basically saying we're going to go completely in a different direction.
Yeah, in some ways, pivots are easier when things aren't working.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly right. Exactly
it's
right.
Like it was hard to kind of
exactly right. No, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Shoot ahead of it. So then you fast forward, you make the pivot, you're growing now in cyber, but you now jump from a market where there are a little bit of competition to a market which is like a competitor every day. You got the incumbents like Palo Alto. You got a different startup every day. And how do you have that challenger mindset, and how do you not get like beat up, discouraged?
Some days you feel like you do actually.
How do you keep that?
I think
keep the wins going.
And so I think there are 2 or 3 ingredients. I think the first one is cultural, which is you have to look inward and say, what am I really good at that I really deeply believe will matter to my customers in long term? And so you have to have this core strength, core differentiation, core advantage that you believe matters to the market. Because if all you're doing is chasing, then you can't have a challenger mindset. You have to believe that something deep down gives me great strength. Second, I think you need your customers to validate that area of strength. You need so many of these customer validations in the core differentiation that over time, you can grow that into a market leading position. So I think to me, that's important. What do you have deep conviction in inside? Because the risk you run, and this is sort of, to be honest, even as I say this, I will say, every day you wake up and you look at your competition Slack channels, and some sales rep is posting something that your competitor is doing that scares you, right? Or that makes you feel like, oh my gosh, why are we not also doing that? So it takes great discipline to say, here's what we are good at. Here's our strategy for execution. And all this noise, you need to sort of fight back every day with your deep conviction. And so I think that is the hardest thing. That's what it takes to sort of constantly challenge the status quo.
And how do you keep your team? How's that? How do you not get them distracted with? Because the big companies can generate a ton of noise. Whether they have the product or not.
Define first where you're competing. Make sure you're highly differentiated. Make sure you're getting customer validation, and use that to align both your exec team and the larger team to say, this is our domain where we'll win. Eventually, we'll get everywhere. Let's make sure we don't sort of lose sight of what our own focus is.
This is kind of your first open source company.
It is. It is.
How does that fit into kind of your, the strategic priorities for the company?
When we pivoted to security in 2018, if we did not have something foundational like Falco that was creating community buzz around Sysdig, and if we just did the old-fashioned enterprise push model of we want to move to security from monitoring, I believe 99% probability we would have failed. Momentum that Falco created around Sysdig as an important security innovation company is what allowed us to do the pivot in the first place, right? And so as I step back, the thing I've learned about open source is it is incredibly powerful in creating name recognition, brand recognition, community followership, right? The other 2 or 3 lessons, the other one that I would say I've learned the hard way is I don't know of too many open source projects that have more than one winner associated with an open source project. I'm just generally of the opinion that open source projects have a one winner to one project relationship. And so the energy has to be on making the project as successful. The rest falls into place, right? And so for us, where Falco has been successful is in creating brand pull and brand recognition, where we are still learning. So 2 out of 3 customers that are today Sysdig customers have come to us because they know of us through Falco. What we've not yet been able to avoid is they come to us and then we have to do a formal enterprise sales cycle where they go through a proof of concept and everything. They don't automatically just upsell. And so the learning I've had is crafting an open source strategy where there's an automatic uplift from open source to commercial. Less than 10% of the companies are successfully able to do that. Most companies can create community awareness around it, and not most. Many companies create community awareness, but the push from community to commercial success has to be engineered very carefully. And we're still learning how to do that.
How do you prioritize how much you invest in the open source versus, commercial, for lack of a better word, products?
First of all, our entire detection and response portfolio does build on the underlying Falco foundation. And what we've generally found is that by making things available within the open source, it does not create alternate competitors for us in the commercial product. So there are customers, large customers like Apple, that use Falco on hundreds of thousands of machines that we're still trying to convert. There are customers like Twilio and a whole bunch of
it's always been a tension.
There's been a
like,
tension,
it's
right?
Like it's too good almost, right?
So this is the comment I'd make is we still have deep conviction that the moment these customers get serious about accompanying a detection with an incident response workflow, with an investigation forensics workflow, they can't do that without relying on our commercial engine, right? And so
cloud product,
everything we do that we contribute helps you with detecting risk. But the moment you think about how do I arm the SOC with actually remediating, triaging, investigating that risk, the commercial product comes into play. And so if it's not today, then a couple of years from now, they'll become customers of ours. So we still believe that we're building the engine for them to become commercial customers. So we don't have too much of a conflict on what we've done is consciously said, this is the domain of open source, this is the domain of commercial. And that boundary is not easily crossed. And so we are very comfortable with what needs to go in the open source.
What the opportunities have been at Sysdig, a lot has been around the team. And, having worked with you for a while now, you kind of obsess about team building. What advice would you give other young founder CEOs on the team building piece? And there's a couple components to that. One is I've always found that you've found the balance between hiring the best people and the best people for the stage of the company.
Right.
And so how do you do that? Like, how do you make sure you're not reaching for something that's not there, but also you're not settling,
So I think this is it's a hard one to accept. But I think if I look back at the last 15 years, there may have been 2 years where I didn't have an exec change on my exec teams. Right. And so if you think about that, sort of you're changing 10% of your exec team almost every year, sometimes 20% to execs. And so you start with the mindset that someone or the other on my exec team is going to probably change, not for performance reasons. Sometimes it's for performance, sometimes it's for fit, sometimes it's for stage of company. And you buy into that. And every year you say, this is probably my 2 hotspots this year. And
so you kind of go in with the mindset.
Yeah. So
this is a constantly evolving thing. It's just never static. So don't over.
That's right. In fact, the advice I would offer is the moment you know that there's a change likely in a function, you have to know who's underneath that person. So I'm not asking anyone to be Machiavellian here. That's just good, prudent thinking, right? If that's an area at risk, who's reporting into that area? Is that strong enough that I can withstand a transition there? And you're almost always asking yourself that in every function. So you almost go in saying there's going to be change every year. You know which is the most likely area of change, and you prepare for that. That's the first thing I'd say. The second one is, I really believe this. Every exec on the team should be able to articulate every functional strategy. So you basically create a team. This is painful because I spent an hour and a half in offsites every quarter. Sorry, a day and a half. We do a day and a half in offsites every quarter where we're going through the entire business. We spend probably a day every 6 weeks reviewing the business, where every exec has to listen to engineer has to listen to sales updates, a marketing person has to listen to updates and so on. So the entire exec team is at no point confused about what's happening in any other part of the business thing. And so I think it's really important that if you want the entire exec team to act as if they won, you have to spend that kind of energy on shared understanding of the business across the entire team.
So you actually you expect your head of engineering to know what's going on.
100%. I mean, if I basically were to say to the person running HR, what are the top deals we're working on this quarter? They may not know why the names are what they are and so on. They can give you context into what they are and why they matter to the company and so on, right? And so I think the entire team needs to be aligned at that level of detail, I feel like, in order to make, because even if you go there and say, look, you had 5 people you're going to hire, I'm going to take those 5 people because we need to do something in marketing that's really important. Everybody already knows why you're reaching into that wallet, right? And so everybody's already aware of the trade-offs you need to make. So I believe that's one of the most important things that a CEO could do, is to constantly spend time on the alignment.
You're obviously laser focused on the cloud security market. I mean, it's kind of an acronym soup, and it keeps changing. Yeah. They keep adding more acronyms, and they keep merging. Like, step back. Like, how do you see this cloud security category evolving? How do you see Sysdig shaping that?
Really, what's happened is there's a consolidated platform thesis that has moved really quickly in the last year. So projects that were standalone for just manage my entitlements, CIEM is the term that people use for managing entitlements, or just manage the risk posture, cloud security posture management, or just do detection and response for my workloads, which is CWPP. All of these have quickly morphed into, I want a single platform that's able to do it. With that, the competitive landscape has
expanded.
So it expanded a lot more 2 years ago when each of them was approaching this from individual lenses. In the last year, Ping, there are companies still around, but the number of competitors that can truly do the whole thing has shrunk down to about 6 or 7, right? 6 or 7 is too many still in a space, but it's also an early space. We have poured all of our energy into being one of the companies that can have a full platform. So that's sort of where we focused on.
How does AI intersect?
So this is really where so if I think about what excites me about this market, one, it's early. 2, it used to be the intersection of cloud and security. 2 really hot themes. And then you've got this turbocharged third theme, which is AI coming into play. And there's 2 aspects. One, how do you use AI to make cloud security better? Our founder, Loris, basically has given up on almost every other project he's been working on for the last 9 months to just focus on how can we use LLMs, how can we use AI to really simplify the problem of how to do cloud security for our customers, right? So it's things like, how do I change the interface into a conversational interface for everything where I had to learn a workflow? The workflow should be implicit, and what I should be able to do is a conversational workflow. Second, how do I build a co-pilot such that I leave the hard tasks to AI to perform? And so ultimately, all of this translates into how do I make the security teams far more productive at using our product to solve cloud security problems. And frankly, go beyond just productivity into using AI to uncover things that I otherwise might not have been visible to me, right? So that's one aspect. In the last 6 months, we've had a sudden surge in customers that are saying, I need to protect my AI cloud. And so this is security for AI rather than AI for security, if you will. And so we're getting into conversations around how do we auto-discover, if I'm in AWS, how do I auto-discover all of the assets that comprise my AI investment when I have a compliance breach or when I have a vulnerability on the workloads that are talking to my AI data? How do I make sure that I can prioritize those and surface them to the team that's working on AI as opposed to just the security team and so on? And so both of those have become important aspects of what we're doing in the context of sort of cloud security.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a lot.
Everywhere.
It's going to be everywhere, and it's going to be in exciting times. Last question. We got a lot of first-time CEOs that listen to the podcast. Looking back, what advice would you give yourself when you were just starting off as a CEO, that you're like, God, I wish someone told me that you've been able to leverage and learn from?
I think, look, I don't know if I do this well still, but it goes back to the challenger mindset. I think the most powerful thing you can do and the hardest thing to do is you obsess about competition, right? We are all, I mean, I go to sleep thinking about the business. I wake up thinking about the business. This is just horrible, but that's the reality of a CEO. You can't turn it off, right? And so you obsess about the business, and so much of what comes at you, you have to remember, if you think about all your press releases that you put out and how it reads to somebody else, you would think you're the next best thing to sliced bread, right? Because all your press releases show you in full glory, which automatically means that when you read your competitors' press releases or when you hear sales teams that are losing explain why they've lost, you're just being barraged by, am I doing enough, right? It can so easily breed a sense of discomfort, insecurity, that you have to retreat to your core of, what am I really good at? What am I trying to achieve? And so you have to just revisit your convictions all the time. And so that is probably the single most important thing I would say is, don't stop paying attention to competition, customer feedback, sales feedback. You have to take those in, but to have the mental fortitude to process them in the context of what you're trying to achieve and not lose sight of what your own goals are is probably the thing that you have to practice most. It's not being good at product or team or market or whatever. It's your own mental fortitude to know how you're going to win in the face of what everybody else is trying to do to win.
Knowing your true north.
Exactly. And balance that carefully with outside inputs and inside inputs.
Well, thank you, Suresh, for joining Spotlight On.
Thank you so much
for sharing your journey as a CEO and at Sysdig.
Oh no, thank you to Accel. It's been, all my startup journeys have been with Accel, and so I'm thrilled to have been part of 3 different journeys with Accel.